My name is Marcus Reeves, and I've been sheriff of King County, Washington for 20 years. In that time, I've dealt with everything Seattle and its surroundings can throw at you. Gang violence in South Seattle, meth labs in rural Fall City, the occasional tech billionaire thinking they're above the law. But there's one case I've never officially reported, one stretch of Interstate 90 that doesn't exist in any Department of Transportation database, even though I've personally responded to 47 incidents there. Mile marker 47 on I-90 between North Bend and Snoqualmie Pass. If you're watching this from Seattle, Bellevue, Tacoma, anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, you've probably driven past it 100 times without knowing. Your brain won't let you see it. The state doesn't acknowledge it exists. But every missing person case I've worked in the Cascade Mountains eventually leads back to that same impossible point on the interstate. Let me back up. I need you to understand that I'm not some conspiracy theorist. I spent 10 years with Seattle PD homicide before taking the sheriff position. I believe in evidence, in facts, and things you can prove in court. But mile marker 47 has taught me that sometimes the facts themselves are part of the conspiracy. It started in October 2004, my first year as sheriff. The rain had been particularly heavy that fall, even by Seattle standards, and I-90 through Snoqualmie Pass was a river of red taillights and cautious drivers. That's when we got the call about Jeremy Walsh, a Microsoft engineer who'd left his Bellevue office at 6 p.m. and never made it home to Issaquah, a drive that should have taken 20 minutes in traffic. His Prius was found on the shoulder near what we recorded as mile marker 46.5, though when I look at those reports now, the numbers seem to shift, like they can't quite decide what they want to be. The car was in perfect condition, keys in the ignition, his laptop bag and coffee still warm in the cup holder. The driver's door was open, and Jeremy's cell phone was on the ground beside the car, recording video. What that video showed changed everything I thought I knew about the boundaries of King County. The footage was 18 minutes long. For the first 3 minutes, it showed the interior of Jeremy's car, NPR playing softly, windshield wipers beating their rhythm, the familiar crawl of I-90 traffic. Then, Jeremy's voice. "What the hell?" That wasn't there before. The phone moved as he picked it up, and through the rain-streaked window you could see it. A mile marker that glowed with a soft blue light, the number 47 seeming to pulse like a heartbeat. But it wasn't just the marker. Behind it, where there should have been forest and mountain, there was something else. A gap. Not darkness, not light, but an absence that hurt to look at even through the phone screen. "I'm going to check it out," Jeremy said. And you could hear the confusion in his voice, the compulsion. I need to see." The phone captured him getting out of the car, walking toward the mile marker. The rain didn't seem to touch him once he got within 10 feet of it. The audio became distorted, filled with what sounded like whispers in a language that predated human speech. The video showed Jeremy reaching out to touch the marker, and then nothing. The phone kept recording, but it was just 18 minutes of empty highway, cars passing by as if nothing had happened. Except if you watched carefully, if you knew what to look for, you could see that none of those cars were in the right lanes. They all swerved slightly, unconsciously avoiding something that their conscious minds couldn't perceive. I drove out there myself that night. I found the spot where Jeremy's car had been, found his phone still recording, though the battery should have died hours ago, but there was no mile marker 47. I checked the official DOT records. I-90 goes from mile marker 46 to 48, skipping 47 entirely. It had always been that way, according to the documentation, but I knew what I'd seen on that video. And when I stood in that spot in the rain, I could feel it. A wrongness in the air, a place where reality had been edited, but the seams still showed. Over the next few months, I started piecing together a pattern. Every few weeks, someone would go missing on that stretch of I-90. Different times of day, different weather conditions, but always at the same spot. The cases would be filed under different mile markers, 46.5, 47.8, between 46 and 48, but I knew they were all the same location. The victims had no connection to each other. Different ages, races, professions. The only thing they had in common was that they were all alone when they disappeared, and they all had some form of recording device that captured their last moments. Dashboard cameras, cell phones, even one guy with an old camcorder who'd been filming his drive through the mountains. Each recording showed the same thing. Mile marker 47 appearing where it shouldn't exist, that terrible gap in reality behind it, and the irresistible compulsion to investigate. I started keeping unofficial records, maintaining them at home rather than at the station. I mapped out the disappearances, tried to find patterns. They weren't random, they followed a schedule that took me months to decode, every 13 days, shifting by exactly 47 minutes each time. Someone with a mathematical mind might have seen it sooner, but once I recognized it, I could predict when the next disappearance would occur. February 15th, 2005, 3:47 a.m. I positioned myself at mile marker 46, watching the empty stretch of highway where 47 should be. I'd told my deputies I was running a speed trap, but really I was waiting to see if my calculations were correct. At exactly 3:47, reality shifted. It's hard to describe if you haven't seen it. One moment, there was just wet asphalt and guardrail. The next, mile marker 47 was there, as if it had always been there. But it wasn't just a sign, it was a doorway, a threshold between our world and somewhere else. Through that gap behind it, I could see movement, shapes that shouldn't exist, architectures that violated three-dimensional space, and in the distance something massive and breathing. A car was approaching, a Honda Civic with a young woman behind the wheel, probably coming back from a late shift at one of the hospitals. I watched her brake lights flare as she saw the marker, watched her pull over. I ran toward her car, shouting for her to stop, to drive away, but she couldn't hear me. Or maybe she could, but the pull of the marker was stronger. She got out of her car and began walking toward it, her movements dreamlike, hypnotized. I grabbed her arm just as she was reaching for the marker. The moment I touched her, I felt it, the pull. It wasn't physical, it was deeper than that. A summons that spoke to some primitive part of the brain that remembered when humans weren't the apex predators, when we hid from things in the dark. The marker wanted us, both of us. It whispered promises in that pre-language, showing visions of what lay beyond, a city that existed in 13 dimensions simultaneously, where the disappeared weren't dead, but transformed, elevated, made part of something greater than individual existence. I pulled her back, both of us falling onto the wet asphalt. The moment we hit the ground, the marker vanished. The gap sealed. Reality reasserted itself with an almost audible snap. The woman, her name was Mia Vogel, I later learned, looked at me in confusion. What? Where am I? I was driving home and then... She looked around, saw her car pulled over on the shoulder. Did I fall asleep? Did I crash? I helped her up, made sure she was okay, and sent her on her way with a story about finding her disoriented on the roadside. She had no memory of mile marker 47, no memory of nearly walking into something that would have erased her from our reality as thoroughly as it had erased Jeremy Walsh and all the others. But I remembered, and I knew I had to do something. I reached out to contacts in other agencies, carefully feeling out whether anyone else had noticed the pattern. Most hadn't, but a few knew exactly what I was talking about. There was a state patrol sergeant who'd been tracking similar disappearances, a park service ranger who'd found abandoned cars in places that shouldn't exist, a tribal police chief from the Snoqualmie tribe who told me their oral histories spoke of the hungry road that had swallowed travelers long before I-90 was ever built. We formed an unofficial task force, sharing information outside official channels. We discovered that mile marker 47 wasn't unique. There were similar spots throughout Washington state, places where reality was thin, where things from outside could push through if the conditions were right. Highway 2 near Stevens Pass had a stretch where mile marker 666 appeared during winter solstices. The highway only goes to marker 328. Route 101 on the Olympic Peninsula had a marker that showed infinity instead of a number. State Route 20 through the North Cascades had an entire phantom rest stop that appeared during new moons, complete with vending machines that dispensed products from companies that never existed. But mile marker 47 was the most active, the most hungry. The tribal police chief, Robert Tahoma, shared something his grandmother had told him. The mountains were here before us, and they'll be here after. But there are things in the mountains that were here before the mountains themselves, things that exist in the spaces between spaces. The roads we build sometimes cut through their territory and they don't like visitors. But they love collectors. I didn't understand what he meant by collectors until March 2005, when everything escalated. I'd been monitoring mile marker 47's appearance schedule religiously, warning people away when I could, making up traffic delays or road hazards to keep drivers from that stretch during the danger windows. But on March 21st, something different happened. Jeremy Walsh came back. I was parked at my usual observation spot when a figure walked out of the empty air where mile marker 47 sometimes appeared. It was Jeremy, but also not Jeremy. He wore the same clothes he'd disappeared in 5 months earlier, but they looked new, untouched by weather or time. His skin had a translucent quality, like looking at someone through frosted glass. And his eyes reflected depths that human eyes shouldn't contain. He walked to the spot where his Prius had been abandoned and stood there, looking at the empty shoulder. Then he turned and looked directly at me, though I was parked 100 yards away in the dark. "Sheriff Reeves," he said, and I heard his voice clearly despite the distance. "We need to talk." I got out of my cruiser and walked toward him, my hand on my service weapon, though I knew it would be useless against whatever he'd become. "Jeremy, is that really you?" He smiled, and for a moment he looked entirely human. "I'm what's left of Jeremy Walsh. I'm also more than Jeremy Walsh ever was. Mile marker 47 isn't a trap, Sheriff. It's a recruitment center. Recruitment for what? For the maintenance crew of reality itself. The disappeared don't die. We become part of the infrastructure that keeps dimensions from bleeding into each other. Earth, your Earth, sits at a crossroads of 13 different dimensional highways. Without us, without the collectors, they'd all crash into each other. Imagine 13 different versions of I-90 trying to exist in the same space. The casualties would be in the millions. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "You're telling me that mile marker 47 is some kind of interdimensional traffic management?" "More than that. It's a selection system. Only certain people can see it. Only certain minds can comprehend what lies beyond. Those who enter don't disappear. They get promoted to a job they never knew existed. We become the people who make sure that when you drive from Seattle to Spokane, you don't accidentally end up in a Seattle where the Space Needle was never built, or a Spokane that's been underwater for 1,000 years. But the families, the people left behind, remember us as missing, as dead. It's cleaner that way. The human mind isn't equipped to handle the truth of what we've become. But Sheriff, I came back tonight for a reason. The system is failing. Too many roads, too many dimensions, not enough collectors. Mile marker 47 is going to start appearing more frequently, becoming more aggressive in its recruitment. He handed me something, a piece of glass or crystal that felt warm in my hand and seemed to exist in more dimensions than I could perceive. "This will let you see them all," he said. "All the missing markers, all the hidden exits. You can't stop the recruitment, but you can help people prepare. Some will be chosen. Make sure they're the right ones." Then he walked back into the empty air and vanished. The crystal in my hand pulsed once and went dark. When I held it up to my eye and looked at I-90, I saw the truth. Mile marker 47 was there, had always been there, existing in a state of quantum superposition, both present and absent simultaneously. But it wasn't alone. There were dozens of phantom markers, each one a doorway to something else, each one waiting for the right traveler at the right moment. The crystal Jeremy Walsh gave me changed everything. When I looked through it at any highway in Washington state, I saw the truth, a network of interdimensional intersections that made our road system look like a child's drawing overlaid on a cosmic blueprint. Mile markers that shouldn't exist, off-ramps to nowhere, rest stops that serviced travelers from realities we couldn't imagine. But seeing them came with a price. The more I used the crystal, the more I could see even without it. By April 2005, I was living in two worlds simultaneously. The normal one, where I was Sheriff Marcus Reeves, and the real one, where I could see the infrastructure of reality itself. My deputies started noticing. I'd call in traffic warnings for hazards they couldn't see, redirect patrols away from areas that looked empty to them, but were teeming with interdimensional activity to me. They thought I was losing it. Maybe I was. The breaking point came on April 23rd when Deputy Lisa Hoffman called me at 2 a.m. "Sheriff, we have a situation. There's been a pileup on I-90 near North Bend. But Marcus, it's weird. The cars are crashed, but there are no drivers. 7 vehicles, all empty, all with their engines still running." I knew before I even arrived what had happened. Mile marker 47 had manifested during rush hour. The scene was surreal. 7 cars in various states of collision, arranged in a perfect circle around a point on the highway that my deputies insisted was empty. But through the crystal, I could see it. Mile marker 47 standing tall and impossible, and behind it, that gap in reality. But this time, the gap was wider. I could see through to the other side more clearly. There was a city there, if you could call it a city. Structures that existed in mathematical dimensions rather than physical ones, inhabited by beings that were partially human, partially something else. And among them I recognized faces that disappeared, all 47 people who'd vanished at mile marker 47 over the past 6 months. They weren't prisoners, they were working, maintaining vast machines that looked like they were made of crystallized space-time, monitoring screens that showed millions of parallel versions of I-90, making minute adjustments to keep them from interfering with each other. "Sheriff?" Lisa's voice snapped me back. "What do you want us to do?" "Secure the scene," I said, pocketing the crystal. "And nobody goes near the center of that circle." We managed to tow the vehicles away, filed reports about a mass hallucination event caused by atmospheric conditions, the kind of bureaucratic nonsense that lets people sleep at night. But I knew this was escalating. That night, I did something I'd been avoiding. I drove to the Snoqualmie Reservation and met with Robert Tahoma, the tribal police chief who'd spoken of the Hungry Road. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he said when I walked into his office. "The true shape of things." I showed him the crystal. His eyes widened with recognition. "My grandmother had one of those," he said quietly. "She was what we called a road keeper, someone who could see the paths between worlds. She said the first interstate highways weren't built by engineers. They were traced along ancient routes that already existed, paths that the indigenous peoples knew to avoid or approach with caution." "Why didn't anyone say anything when they built I-90? Robert laughed bitterly. "You think they'd have listened? Excuse me, federal government, but your highway plans intersect with 13-dimensional barriers and at least 3 apatite entities. They'd have built it anyway and just institutionalized anyone who complained." He pulled out an old map, hand-drawn on what looked like deerskin. It showed the Puget Sound region, but not as any modern map would represent it. Lines of force crisscrossed the area, and at certain intersections, symbols were drawn. Warnings, prayers, and markers. Here, he pointed to a spot that corresponded with mile marker 47. "This has always been a crossing point. The mountains channel energy, create a natural weakness between worlds. The highway just made it easier to access. So, what do we do?" My grandmother would say, "Feed it. The crossing points aren't malevolent, they're necessary. They're pressure valves. Without them, the barriers between worlds would either collapse entirely or become so rigid that reality would shatter like glass under tension." The disappeared. They're not victims. They're selected. Selected for what? To become part of the mechanism that keeps everything running. Think of reality like a highway system. You need maintenance crews, traffic controllers, engineers. The disappeared become those workers, but for the cosmic infrastructure. I thought about Jeremy Walsh, translucent and transformed, talking about his new job maintaining dimensional barriers. But why take people? Why not just ask for volunteers? Robert smiled sadly. "Would you volunteer to give up everything you know, everyone you love, to become a cosmic traffic controller?" The crossing points select people who are already partially disconnected. Those who drive alone at night, who are between places in their lives who won't be immediately missed, or whose absence won't cause reality ripples. That's horrible. That's survival. Not just ours. Every version of Earth that exists along this dimensional highway. Over the next few weeks, I struggled with this knowledge. I continued my patrols, continued trying to warn people away from mile marker 47 during its manifestation windows, but I also started researching the disappeared more carefully. Jeremy Walsh, no family, few friends, worked remotely. Mia Martinez, recently divorced, estranged from relatives, night shift nurse. David Kim, graduate student, living alone. Thesis advisor on sabbatical. The pattern was clear. Mile marker 47 selected people whose disappearance would cause minimal disruption. It was horrible and logical in equal measure. Then, on May 15th, 2005, everything changed again. I received a package at my home. No return address, no postal marks, just my name written in handwriting that seemed to shift between different styles. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The photograph showed a massive control room, like NASA Mission Control, but impossibly larger, with screens showing thousands of different versions of Washington State. In the center, clearly visible, was Jeremy Walsh at some kind of control station. But there were others too, people I recognized from missing persons cases going back decades. The letter read, "Sheriff Reeves, the system is failing." Not just at mile marker 47, but at all the crossing points globally. "We need more collectors, but the selection process is too slow. The random recruitment isn't working anymore. You've been chosen as a shepherd. Your job is to identify candidates, people who could handle the transition, who have the right psychological profile to become collectors without losing their sanity. Look for high spatial intelligence, comfort with solitude, flexible reality perception, minimal social attachments, strong sense of duty. When you identify someone, have them drive past mile marker 47 during a manifestation window. If they're right for the job, they'll see it. If not, they'll pass by unaware. We're not asking you to sacrifice people. We're asking you to help us find those who are already halfway gone, already living between worlds, and give them purpose on a cosmic scale. The alternative is a cascade failure. 13 versions of Seattle trying to exist in the same space, millions of deaths as realities collapse into each other. Choose wisely. The Collected. I burned the letter, but I couldn't forget its contents. Was I really being asked to feed people to an interdimensional recruitment system? Or was I being offered a chance to prevent a catastrophe beyond imagination? I started paying closer attention to the people around me, looking for signs, patterns. Who was disconnected enough to disappear without causing ripples, but stable enough to handle the truth of what they'd become? The first person I identified was Thomas Anderson. Yes, really, and yes, he'd heard all the Matrix jokes. He was a game designer working on something called augmented reality, overlaying digital information on the real world. But Tom saw more than digital overlays. I'd noticed him at accident scenes, staring at empty spaces as if something was there, unconsciously avoiding spots that I knew were dimensionally unstable. I approached him carefully, over coffee at the Twin Peaks-inspired diner in North Bend. "You see them too, don't you?" I said without preamble. "The places where things don't quite match up." He nearly dropped his coffee. "How did you—" I thought I was going crazy. "You're not crazy. You're perceiving something most people can't. Have you ever driven past mile marker 47 on I-90? "There is no mile marker 47, he said automatically, then paused. "But sometimes I think I see it. Like it's there in my peripheral vision, but disappears when I look directly at it. I made a decision that would haunt me forever. Drive past there tonight at 11:47 p.m. Don't stop, just drive. If you see it clearly, if it calls to you, then you have a choice to make. If you don't see anything, forget we had this conversation." Tom looked at me for a long moment. "You're recruiting me for something. I'm telling you that you're already recruited. Your brain just hasn't admitted it yet." He showed up that night. I watched from my usual position as his Subaru approached the empty stretch where mile marker 47 would manifest. At exactly 11:47, reality shifted. The marker appeared, and Tom's brake lights flared. He sat in his car for 10 minutes just staring. Then he got out, walked to the marker and touched it. Unlike the others who'd been compelled, Tom seemed to be making a conscious choice. He turned back once, saw me watching, and nodded. Then he stepped through the gap. His car remained for exactly 47 minutes before it simply faded away, as if it had never existed. The next morning, Tom's apartment was empty, had always been empty according to the landlord's records. Only I remembered he'd ever existed, but that night I dreamed. Tom was there, in that impossible control room, learning to operate systems that managed the flow of reality itself. He looked happy, fulfilled in a way I'd never seen him in our world. "Thanks, Sheriff," he said in the dream. "This is what I was meant to do." I was always between worlds. Now I'm keeping them apart. I woke with tears on my face, not sure if they were from relief or guilt. Over the next months, I became what the letter had called me, a shepherd. I identified 12 more candidates, people who were already partially disconnected from our reality. Some were artists who painted impossible geometries. Some were programmers who dreamed in code that shouldn't compile but did. Some were just lonely souls who'd always felt like they were living in the wrong dimension. I didn't force anyone, I just pointed them toward mile marker 47 at the right time. Those who were meant to see it did, those who weren't passed by obliviously. The pileups stopped. The random disappearances ended. The system stabilized. But the weight of it was crushing me. I was essentially feeding people to an interdimensional machine, even if they were willing food. I started drinking, stopped sleeping, and my deputies were beginning to ask serious questions about my mental health. Then, in December 2005, I got another visit from the other side. This time, it wasn't just Jeremy. It was all of them, everyone I'd shepherded to mile marker 47. They stood on I-90 in the middle of the night, translucent and shimmering, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "We need to show you something," Jeremy said. They surrounded me, and suddenly I wasn't on I-90 anymore. I was in the space between spaces, seeing reality from the outside. It was like looking at a massive highway interchange from above, but instead of roads, there were timelines, dimensions, possible worlds all intersecting and diverging. And it was chaos. Without the collectors, without the maintenance, realities were crashing into each other constantly. I saw a Seattle where the 2001 earthquake had leveled the city, trying to exist in the same space as our Seattle. I saw a Washington state that was underwater, another that was a nuclear wasteland, another where humans had never evolved, all trying to occupy the same coordinates in the cosmic structure. The collectors were the only thing keeping them separate. They manned the control stations, adjusted the flow, prevented the collisions. It was exhausting, endless work, but it was vital. Every major city sits on one of these intersections, Jeremy explained. Every interstate highway follows dimensional channels. We're not just maintaining roads, we're maintaining the possibility of existence itself. Why show me this? Because you need to understand the scope. Mile marker 47 isn't unique. There are thousands of these recruitment points globally, but the Seattle intersection is one of the most complex, one of the most dangerous. We need the best minds here, the most adaptable consciousness. You're our recruiter, but you're also more than that. What do you mean? They all looked at each other, communicating in ways that transcended speech. "You're halfway there yourself, Sheriff," Mia Martinez said. She'd been one of my early shepherding cases. "Every time you look through that crystal, every time you see both worlds, you're becoming more like us. Eventually, you'll have to choose, stay in one reality or help maintain all of them." The revelation that I was transforming hit me like a physical blow. When they returned me to I-90, I sat in my patrol car shaking, staring at my hands. They looked normal, but when I held up the crystal I could see through them to the quantum foam beneath. See the probability streams that made up what I called myself. I was becoming one of them. A collector. And I hadn't even passed through mile marker 47. The next morning, I tried to resign. Walked into the county commissioner's office with my badge and gun, ready to end this before I lost whatever humanity I had left. But Commissioner Janet Hyde looked at me with eyes that reflected too much understanding. "You can't quit, Marcus," she said softly. "None of us can. You know," she pulled out a crystal identical to mine. "I've been managing the county's relationship with the crossing point since 1987. My predecessor left me a letter explaining everything, just as I'll leave one for mine. King County doesn't just maintain roads and law enforcement, Sheriff. We maintain reality itself for 2.3 million people. How many know? Officially, none. Unofficially, about 30 people across various agencies. We call ourselves the Infrastructure Committee. Very boring name, very important job. She showed me records going back to the 1960s. Every major highway project had been designed not just for traffic flow, but to channel and control dimensional pressures. The I-90 expansion in the 90s wasn't about capacity. It was about reinforcing barriers between worlds. The light rail system currently under construction, its real purpose was to create a stabilization network that would prevent reality cascades in the urban core. Mile marker 47 is just the most visible symptom, Janet explained. The entire Puget Sound region sits on a dimensional fault line. Boeing doesn't just build airplanes here by accident. The aerospace industry was positioned here because the dimensional instability makes certain calculations and manufacturing processes possible that wouldn't work elsewhere. And Microsoft? Amazon? Ever wonder why Seattle became such a tech hub? The human mind works differently here, processes information in ways that shouldn't be possible. The proximity to dimensional intersections enhances certain types of thinking. Your Bill Gates, your Jeff Bezos, they're not geniuses. They're just people whose brains adapted to the background radiation of multiple realities. It was too much. Every aspect of my life, my city, had been shaped by forces I'd never known existed. But Janet wasn't done. We have a problem, Marcus. The system is accelerating. The collectors can't keep up with the increasing traffic between dimensions. We need more recruits, but we also need something else. We need an anchor. An anchor? Someone who exists partially in both states, human enough to understand our world, transformed enough to interact with theirs. A bridge between the collectors and the collected. The indigenous peoples had them, called them different names. The Snoqualmie called them the Bridgewalkers. But we haven't had one since 1962. What happened in 1962? Mount Rainier. You know the official story, a small eruption, some ashfall, no big deal. The real story? A dimensional cascade that almost merged 17 versions of Seattle. The Bridgewalker at the time, a man named Harold Crest, sacrificed himself to seal the rift. He became part of Mount Rainier itself, a permanent anchor point. But anchors don't last forever. Harold is failing. She pulled out a file, thick with documents and photographs. One showed Mount Rainier, but through what must have been a special lens. The mountain was covered in a web of light, all emanating from a single point near the summit. At that point, barely visible, was the outline of a human figure. That's Harold. He's been holding the Seattle Dimensional Matrix stable for 43 years, but he's fragmenting. When he fails, and he will fail soon, we'll need a replacement. I knew where this was going. You want me to replace him. Not want, need. You're already partially transformed. You understand both worlds, and most importantly, you've shown you can make the hard choices. The shepherding program you've been running? That wasn't your idea. The collectors planted it in your mind because they recognized you as a potential anchor. So I don't have a choice. You always have a choice. You can walk away, let someone else handle this. But Marcus, in the 6 months you've been shepherding, you've prevented 47 random disappearances. The people you've guided to mile marker 47 went willingly, prepared, understanding their purpose. That's 47 families who got closure instead of mystery. 47 transitions that strengthened rather than destabilized our reality. I left her office with the weight of worlds on my shoulders. That night, I drove up to Crystal Mountain, where you can see Rainier clearly. Through the crystal, I could see Harold Crest spread throughout the mountain like a nervous system made of light, holding reality together through sheer will, and he could see me. Finally, his voice echoed in my mind. My replacement arrives. I haven't agreed to anything. Haven't you? Every person you've shepherded, every reality break you've prevented, you've been training for this. You think the crystal just lets you see? It's been changing you, preparing you. You're already more anchor than human. He showed me what he saw. Thousands of dimensional threads converging on Seattle, each one a possible reality trying to assert itself. His consciousness was the only thing keeping them from tangling, from creating a knot that would destroy every version of the Pacific Northwest. I'm tired, Marcus. 43 years of holding the line, but I can't let go until someone takes my place, and it has to be soon. The dimensional pressure is building. There's something coming, something that will test every barrier we have. What's coming? December 21st, 2005, the winter solstice. But more than that, it's a dimensional alignment that happens once every 2,847 years. Every reality that contains a version of Earth will align at exactly the same space-time coordinates. Without proper anchoring, they'll all try to exist in the same place simultaneously. That's in 2 weeks. 2 weeks to decide if you'll save millions of lives by sacrificing your humanity, or remain human and watch reality collapse. I spent those 2 weeks setting my affairs in order. I wrote letters to people who mattered, though they'd never understand why I was really saying goodbye. I trained my deputy, Lisa Hoffman, to take over as sheriff, though I couldn't tell her the real reason. I also spent time with the Infrastructure Committee, learning the true history of Seattle. The Great Seattle Fire of 1889 wasn't about wooden buildings. It was about burning out a dimensional infestation. The 1949 earthquake was actually a controlled demolition of reality barriers that had become too rigid. The 1962 World's Fair and the Space Needle weren't about showcasing the future. They were about creating a massive anchor point in the heart of the city, a stabilization node that still functions today. Every piece of Seattle's history had been shaped by the need to manage our position on the dimensional crossroads. On December 19th, 2 days before the alignment, I met with Robert Tahoma one last time. He performed a ceremony, something his ancestors had done for bridgewalkers throughout history. He painted symbols on my skin with a mixture that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously: solid, liquid, gas, and something else. These will help you maintain your identity, he said. The danger isn't death, it's dissolution. Becoming so spread out across dimensions that you forget you were ever a single person. The symbols will remind your consciousness to cohere. That night, the collectors came to me in a dream that wasn't a dream. All of them, everyone I'd shepherded, everyone who'd passed through mile marker 47 in the last 50 years. They stood in a vast circle, and in the center was a chair made of crystallized space-time. "It's time," Jeremy Walsh said. "The anchor point is prepared. Harold is ready to let go. Are you ready to take his place?" I wanted to say no. Every human instinct screamed against it. But then I saw them, millions of possible futures spreading out from this moment. In the ones where I walked away, Seattle ceased to exist in every timeline simultaneously. In the ones where I accepted, the city survived, evolved, became something greater. What exactly happens to me? You become the focal point for the entire Pacific Northwest dimensional matrix. Your consciousness expands to monitor and maintain thousands of reality streams simultaneously. Your physical form becomes distributed through the anchor points: Mount Rainier, the Space Needle, mile marker 47, and 17 other locations. You'll still be you, but you'll also be more than you. Will I be alone? Never. You'll be connected to every anchor globally, every collector in the system. You'll be part of the greatest consciousness network in the known multiverse. And sometimes, on quiet nights, you'll be able to manifest physically, to walk among humans, to remember what it was like to be singular. I made my decision. On December 20th, I drove to mile marker 47 one last time, but I didn't wait for it to manifest. I could see it now constantly, existing in all states simultaneously. The gap behind it was no longer terrifying. It was familiar, almost welcoming. My deputies were handling a multi-car pileup a few miles away, carefully orchestrated by the infrastructure committee to keep them busy. I was alone on the highway, standing before the marker that had defined the last year of my life. I reached out and touched it. The transformation wasn't painful, it was overwhelming. My consciousness exploded outward, spreading through the dimensional framework of the Pacific Northwest like water through a vast network of pipes. I could feel every road, every building, every person as a distinct pressure point in the fabric of space-time. I felt Harold Crest's relief as he finally let go, his consciousness collapsing back to a single point before dissipating into whatever comes after anchor duty. His last thought was thank you. Then the alignment began. If you've ever stood at the center of a hurricane, you know the strange calm that exists there while chaos rages all around. That's what being an anchor felt like. Millions of realities pressed against each other, trying to occupy the same space, and I was the only thing keeping them separate. I spread myself through the anchor points. Part of me was in Mount Rainier, feeling the geological pressure of 17 different versions of the mountain. Part was in the Space Needle, its steel structure resonating with frequencies from dimensions where it was made of crystal, wood, or materials that don't exist in baseline reality. Part was at mile marker 47, the original wound that had become a doorway. The pressure was incredible. Each reality had its own Seattle, its own history, its own version of events. I had to keep them all separate while allowing the necessary exchanges, the ideas, innovations, and insights that made Seattle what it was. I saw versions where the city was underwater, where it was a utopia, where it had never been founded. I saw timelines where I had made different choices, where I'd never become sheriff, where I'd died in that confrontation with Jeremy Walsh. All equally real, all trying to exist. For 17 hours, I held them apart. The collectors worked frantically, adjusting flows, redirecting pressures, but I was the central point, the anchor that everything else referenced. Without me, their work would have been meaningless. And then, as the sun set on December 21st, the alignment passed. The realities separated, returning to their proper dimensions. The pressure eased. I had survived. Seattle had survived. Reality itself had survived. But I was forever changed. It's been 20 years since I became the anchor for Seattle's dimensional matrix. 20 years of existing everywhere and nowhere, of being Marcus Reeves, and something infinitely larger. If you're watching this, it's because the time has come for you to know the truth about the city you live in, the roads you drive on, and the reality you take for granted. I can manifest physically for exactly 47 minutes every 13 days. During these windows, I walk among you, check on my old life, and record these messages for when the next anchor is needed. Because that time is coming soon. Seattle has changed dramatically since 2005. The tech boom wasn't random, it was guided. Every major company that settled here was drawn by the dimensional resonance. Amazon's algorithms don't just predict shopping patterns, they calculate probability streams across multiple realities. Microsoft's cloud computing literally uses servers that exist in parallel dimensions. And those new quantum computers being developed in Redmond, they're not computing, they're consulting alternate timelines where the calculations have already been done. The city's growth has been carefully managed by the Infrastructure Committee, now expanded and renamed the Department of Dimensional Affairs, hidden, within the Department of Transportation, naturally. They work with me, through me, to ensure that Seattle's expansion doesn't destabilize the barriers. But let me tell you what it's really like to be an anchor. Imagine being conscious in 17 different locations simultaneously. Right now, part of me is in Mount Rainier, feeling the pressure of tectonic plates that exist in dimensions where the ring of fire is active, dormant, or never formed. Another part is in the Space Needle, where I can see every tourist, every local, every possible future spreading out from their presence at that landmark. Part of me flows through I-90, I-5, 99, feeling every car, every driver, every journey as a thread in the cosmic tapestry. And mile marker 47? It's still there, still recruiting, but now it's under my direct control. I choose who sees it, who gets the opportunity to become a collector. The random disappearances have ended completely. Every recruitment is voluntary, informed, purposeful. The collectors and I work in harmony now. Jeremy Walsh has become something like my lieutenant, managing the day-to-day operations of keeping realities separate. Mia Martinez handles the medical emergencies. Yes, dimensional medicine is a thing, treating conditions that arise when people are exposed to multiple realities. Tom Anderson programs the reality subroutines that keep our dimensions stable. They're not human anymore, but they're not lost either. They're evolved, transformed into something necessary for the survival of millions. Through my expanded consciousness, I've learned the true history of Earth's dimensional status. We're not unique. Every planet with conscious life eventually discovers it sits at the intersection of multiple realities. It's a phase of evolution, like developing language or discovering fire. The challenge is surviving the discovery. Some planets don't make it. They either isolate themselves completely, cutting off all dimensional flow and eventually stagnating into extinction, or they open themselves too much and get overwhelmed by the infinite possibilities, losing their core identity in the cosmic noise. Earth is trying for a third path: managed integration. We acknowledge the other realities, we exchange information and resources, but we maintain our distinct identity. It's like being part of a cosmic internet where each reality is a separate network, connected but autonomous. Seattle has become the primary hub for this integration in North America. The Space Needle isn't just a tourist attraction, it's a transmission tower, sending and receiving signals across dimensional barriers. The new light rail system that now extends from Everett to Tacoma? Its real purpose is to create a stabilization grid that prevents reality earthquakes. Oh yes, those are real. When dimensions rub against each other too roughly, it creates tremors that manifest as everything from actual earthquakes to mass hallucination events. The windstorm of 2006? That was actually a dimensional shear that I barely managed to contain. The atmospheric river events we've been having. Those are literally rivers of possibility flowing from dimension to dimension. But it's not all cosmic crisis management. There's beauty in this role too. I see every possible Seattle simultaneously. I see the version where the Sonics never left, where the kingdom still stands, where the waterfront was never developed. I see Seattles that are underwater, underground, or floating in the clouds. Each one is real. Each one has millions of people living their lives, unaware of the others. Sometimes, beneficial traits leak through. That's why Seattle has such a vibrant music scene. We're unconsciously influenced by dimensions where different musical evolution occurred. Our coffee culture? We're tasting echoes of realities where coffee evolved differently, creating flavor profiles that shouldn't exist in our baseline dimension. The Seattle freeze, that social phenomenon where locals are polite but distant, that's actually a psychological defense mechanism. People who live near dimensional intersections unconsciously maintain emotional barriers to prevent their consciousness from spreading across realities. It's not unfriendliness. It's existential self-preservation. But now I need to talk about why I'm recording this message. why the time has come for revelation. The system is evolving. For the past century, the dimensional management has been hidden, secret, known only to a select few. But that's changing. The barriers between realities aren't weakening. They're becoming more permeable, not breaking down, but allowing for more conscious interaction. In the next 5 years, Seattle will experience what we call a consciousness cascade. The general population will become aware of the dimensional nature of reality. It won't happen all at once. That would cause mass panic and psychological breakdown. Instead, it will be gradual. People will start having dreams of alternate lives. They'll experience déjà vu that isn't memory, but dimension bleed. They'll begin to see the phantom mile markers, the roads that exist in superposition. The Infrastructure Committee has been preparing. The new mental health initiatives the city has been promoting. They're actually training programs for dimensional awareness. The earthquake preparedness drills, they're teaching people how to respond to reality shifts. The push for sustainable living? It's about reducing the resource drain that comes from existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But most importantly, we need a new anchor. My time is limited. Being an anchor isn't sustainable indefinitely. The human consciousness, even transformed as mine is, can only stretch so far for so long before it begins to fragment. Harold Crest lasted 43 years. I've managed 20, but I'm approaching my limit. I can feel myself spreading too thin, forgetting which thoughts are mine and which belong to the versions of me in other dimensions. The next anchor has already been chosen, though they don't know it yet. They're out there right now, probably living a normal life. Maybe occasionally wondering why reality feels thin sometimes, why they see things others don't. They'll be drawn to mile marker 47 soon. When they are, they'll find this message, these recordings, this truth. If that's you, if you're watching this because something called you to that impossible mile marker, then know this: you're not crazy. You're not imagining things, you're evolving, becoming something necessary for the survival of millions. The transformation is voluntary. You can walk away, live a normal life, pretend you never learned any of this. But if you choose to become the anchor, you'll be taking on the most important job that nobody knows exists. You'll be the foundation that keeps Seattle stable as humanity transitions to a multidimensional species. The collectors will train you. The Infrastructure Committee will support you, and I'll be here, in whatever form I can maintain, to guide the transition. You won't be alone, even when you're spread across 17 dimensions simultaneously. Let me tell you about some of the others who help maintain this system. Lisa Hoffman, who took over as sheriff after I disappeared, knows the truth now. She can't see the phantom markers, but she manages the human side of the equation, making sure the disappearances are properly documented, the families get closure, and the wrong people don't investigate too deeply. Commissioner Janet Hyde retired, but her successor David Kim, yes, one of my early shepherding cases who didn't transition, continues the Infrastructure Committee's work. He's building a new team of people who can handle the truth, preparing for the consciousness cascade. Robert Tahoma's granddaughter, Maria, has become the new bridge walker for the Snoqualmie tribe, maintaining the indigenous knowledge that predates and supplements our technological approach to dimensional management. She performs the ceremonies that keep the ancient barriers strong, the ones that existed before highways, before cities, before colonization. Even the mayor is in on it now, though publicly she maintains complete ignorance. The city's new Vision 2030 plan, it's actually a roadmap for dimensional integration, disguised as urban planning. But the real heroes are the collectors, those who gave up their humanity to become the maintenance crew of reality. There are now 347 of them working the Seattle metropolitan area alone, Each one a former human who chose to evolve beyond individual existence. They don't regret it. I know because I'm connected to all of them. They've found purpose on a cosmic scale, becoming part of something greater than any single life could offer. The tourist who vanished from Pike Place Market last week? She's now managing the dimensional flow through the waterfront, preventing the fish-throwing tradition from accidentally opening a portal to dimensions where seafood evolved sentience. The Microsoft engineer who disappeared on the 520 bridge? He's coding reality patches that prevent the floating bridge from existing in multiple states simultaneously. The barista who went missing from that Capitol Hill coffee shop. She's harmonizing the dimensional resonances that make Seattle's coffee culture possible. Each one chose this. Each one saw mile marker 47 or one of its sister markers, felt the call, and answered. They're not dead, not lost. They're transformed, essential, eternal in their own way. As for me, I exist now as something between human and infrastructure. I am Marcus Reeves, but I'm also the consciousness that flows through every road in King County. I feel every commute, every journey, every trip as a personal experience. When you drive I-90 through Snoqualmie Pass, you're driving through me. When you take the ferry across Puget Sound, you're sailing through my awareness. When you stand atop the Space Needle, you're standing within my expanded consciousness. It's not godhood, it's servitude on a cosmic scale. I don't control anything. I simply maintain, preserve, protect. I keep the dimensions from colliding, the realities from merging, the possible from overwhelming the actual. But my time is ending. The signs are clear. I'm starting to forget which reality is prime, which Seattle is real. Yesterday, or was it 13 years ago? I manifested physically and couldn't remember if the Sonics had left or stayed, if the viaduct had been torn down or was still standing. These aren't memory lapses. They're dimensional bleeds, signs that my consciousness is spreading too thin. So this message is my legacy, my warning, my invitation. Seattle needs a new anchor. Someone who can see the impossible, accept the incredible, and sacrifice the personal for the universal. The next time you drive I-90, pay attention around North Bend. If you see a mile marker that shouldn't exist, if you feel a pull towards something that seems impossible, don't ignore it. That's reality itself calling out for a new guardian. And if you answer that call, if you become the next anchor, know that you'll be joining a tradition that goes back to before Seattle existed, before Washington was a state, before humans understood what dimensions were. The indigenous peoples knew. They had anchors, though they called them by different names. This land has always been a crossroads, has always needed guardians. The mountain is calling. The city is waiting. The dimensions are pressing against each other, seeking balance, seeking an anchor. Mile marker 47 is there, has always been there, will always be there. It's not a trap or a curse. It's an invitation to become part of the most important job that nobody knows exists. The roads we travel aren't just asphalt and concrete. They're the nervous system of reality itself, and they need someone to keep the signals flowing, to prevent the cosmic traffic jams that would destroy everything we know. I was Sheriff Marcus Reeves. I am the Seattle anchor. Soon, I'll be something else. Dispersed consciousness, quantum memory, echoes in the dimensional framework. But the work will continue. It has to, because without anchors, without collectors, without the invisible infrastructure we maintain, Seattle, and every city at a dimensional crossroads, would collapse into impossibility. The next time you're stuck in traffic on I-90, remember, you're not just waiting for cars to move. You're paused at an intersection between worlds, held safely in place by those who gave up everything to keep reality stable. Drive safely. Pay attention to the impossible. And if you see mile marker 47, know that it sees you too. Some roads lead home, others lead beyond. Choose wisely.